So you want to 3D model something, but you don't know where to start. Well, this tutorial is for you. In this tutorial, I'm going to be going over the basics of navigating the UI in Blender, as well as some of the tools that you're going to use and how to set up a scene for modeling. So to get started, what you're going to want before you start Blender is a 3-button mouse. That's a mouse with a left click, right click, and a scroll wheel, as well as a keyboard with a number pad. So the mouse is important because you use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out by scrolling. You can also click the scroll wheel in like it was a mouse button to pivot around a selected object. And if you hit shift and hit the scroll wheel in, you pan around the scene so that you can move your camera as you please. The number pad is important because it lets you snap to different views. So if I hit 1, 3, or 7 on the number pad, I snap to different orthographic views. So 1 is front orthographic. You can tell by looking in this top left corner, I'm in front orthographic view. 3 is right, 7 is the top, and if I hit 9, I switch to the opposite view. So now I'm in bottom orthographic because I hit 7 then 9, and now I'm in back orthographic because I hit 1 then 9. This also works for perspective view. If you hit 9, it rotates the camera 90 degrees around, but it does not flip the camera. The other buttons on the number pad, 2, 4, 6, and 8, let you move your camera viewport incrementally in a set number of degrees, 2 being down, 4 is left, 6 is right, and 8 is up. And lastly, 5 switches between orthographic and perspective view. So right now I'm in perspective view. You can see the grid lines disappearing into a center point in the horizon. When I hit 5, it's all flat, isometric. None of that's happening. Finally, there's 0, which lets you see what the camera sees. So this is the camera in Blender. For modeling for games, we don't really use this, but if you're doing a render or you want to get an image out to show your team, this is what you'd use that for. Finally, there's the period key, and the way that this works is it snaps you to your selected object to view. So if I click on this camera and then I hit period, it snaps to this camera. If I hit the cube and then period, it snaps to the cube. The cool trick is if you select multiple objects, so now I have everything in my scene selected, and then hit period, it snaps to the median point of all of those objects. So that's why you're going to want a mouse with 3 buttons and a number pad. But if you don't have this, what you can use instead is this gizmo in the top right. If you click and drag it, it pivots you around as if you were using that middle mouse button, and you can grab this hand tool to move. So you click on it and then move, and then this magnifying glass, you click and zoom in and stuff. So it's really quite possible and easy to use Blender without a middle mouse button if you're, say, on a laptop. But personally, I would recommend using a mouse anyways. A 3-button mouse anyways, as well as a number pad. Another alternative to this is if you go to edit and then preferences and then input, you can emulate the number pad with the top row of keys rather than the number pad to the right, or emulate a 3-button mouse by alt left clicking. The only issue with this is if you emulate the number pad, then you can't do certain functions based on hotkeys in Blender, and the same is true for emulating the 3-button mouse with the alt click. So avoid that if you can. I think I forgot to mention, if you click on one of these dots, it'll snap to that orthographic view relative. So here I am in front orthographic. If I click on green again in the center, now I'm in back orthographic, and then I can go to bottom orthographic or top. So very useful to keep in mind. So now that we have got our bearings for navigating the UI, let's start adding our reference image in. And so I'm just going to pull up this file that I downloaded off the internet. I've got an image of a chair because that's what I want to model today. And so making sure that I'm in front orthographic view, that's going to be important for this. I'm going to drag my chair image into my scene. So now we have our chair image in our scene that we can use for reference. And I'm just going to do some tweaks to it to make it easier to look at for me. So I'm going to go to object data properties and then set the transparency to true and then lower that opacity so that it's not quite as bright as the actual object itself. And then one thing I'm going to do, just because I know I don't want it for later, is I'm going to disable the display perspective view because I'm going to be modeling this using orthographic views, and I don't really want to see my reference images when I'm trying to look at my model in an isolated environment. So I can grab my reference image and move it with G. And you see now I can move it around and it'll follow my mouse wherever it goes. If I hold something like Shift, then it makes it move even slower, so I can get more precise movements. If I hold Control, let's zoom out a bit. If I hold Control, you see it snaps it to the grid. And if I zoom in a bit and see these smaller units and hold G, hit G and then hold Control, then it snaps it to those smaller units on the grid. So that's how you get really precise placements. So I'm just going to make sure that the feet of this image are on this bottom plane right here, because this is my ground plane. And then I'm going to hide my cube, hit G, and then hit X to snap my movement to the X grid, or the X axis, and then line it up in the center. So hitting any hotkey for transformations, that's G for grab to move stuff around, S for scale, so this is scaling up and down, or R for rotate. If you hit any of those buttons and then a corresponding axis, so like Z for the Z axis, then you will move your whatever you selected only snap to that axis. So it's really useful for precise movements and stuff. One other cool thing about this is if you hit G to move something and then you say, well, maybe I just don't want to move it in the Z axis, but I want to move it in the X and Y at the same time. If you hit Shift Z, then it snaps it to everything but the Z axis. So pretty useful. So now that we've got our reference image in, we're going to take a look at this cube in a little more detail. So if I go to my object properties, you can see that it's 1 unit by 1 unit by 1 unit. This is the default Blender cube. And if we go to our scene properties and click on units, right now you see it's set to metric and meters as our default units. This might trick you into thinking that this cube is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, but it's actually not. This square right here is 1 meter by 1 meter. This cube is 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. The way that Blender does this is the cube is 1 meter from the center point to the edge of the cube. So a little bit frustrating there. Just something to keep in mind for getting the scale of stuff proper. One more note about scale is you can see that my reference image has units on it. So this chair is supposed to be 33 inches tall. Right now it's a little over 2 meters tall, so that's clearly off. I don't really know the metric system, and even I know that that's off. So I'm going to take my default cube and delete it. And I'm going to set my units from metric to imperial. and from feet to inches. And now I'm going to Shift A to add a new mesh and add a cube in. And this is our 2-inch cube. And then I'm going to hit S and then type in 0.5 to make it 1 inch. And then I'm going to hit G, or I'm going to hit S for scale, Z for the Z axis, and 33 for 33 inches. And so now we have our reference for how big 33 inches is. Now I'm going to go back to my units, change it from inches to feet, hit S, and then divide by 12, because I do not want my cube to be 33 feet tall. I want it to be 33 inches tall, and there are 12 inches in a foot, so 33 feet divided by 12 is 33 inches. So now G and Z to snap this to my floor so that it's at the proper height. And it looks like it's a little bit off, so G, Z, Shift, Control, and that looks correct. And so now I'm going to use this to tell me how tall my image of a chair should be. The only problem is when I hit S to scale it scales into the medium point, and so it's not really scaling properly. To remedy this, this little circle right here with the red and white is called my 3D cursor. And I can use this really cleverly to change the pivot point for my scaling. So if I go up here to this menu, which is the transform pivot point menu, and then select 3D cursor, now when I scale my image of a chair, it actually scales down relative to the 3D cursor. So I can get that precise measurement that I want. And let's just make sure the feet are on the ground. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So now I know exactly how tall my chair should be. One other thing, I'm going to go back to my object properties on this image and then go to viewport display and then scroll down to in front and check that. So now I can see my reference image in front of my object, even though technically it is behind it. So now if I just grab this on the y-axis, so G then Y to snap to the y-axis and pull it back a bit because I don't want it to be intersecting my model when I'm working on it. Now I can make another copy of this reference image so that I can get my side view. So what I'm going to do for that is Shift D to duplicate, and then I can click and place it, but if I just right click, it'll set it back to the original location. So now I want to rotate this 90 degrees so that it's flipped the opposite direction, so when I go into side view I can see it. But if I hit R and then Z to snap to the Z axis, you see it's rotating around that 3D cursor, and I don't want that anymore. So I'm going to change my transform pivot point from 3D cursor back to median point. Then I'm going to go to 3 for side view and then hit R, Z, and then -90 because I know that my reference image is backwards. So G, Y to snap to the y-axis and move it forward. Line it up so that reference is in the center. And all right, that's looking pretty good. I could add another reference image for my top view, but I don't really care that much, so I'm not going to do it. But you know what? I'll show you how to do it just for demonstration's sake. So Shift D to duplicate, right click to just set it to the same spot, R, X, -90 because I know that this image is backwards. And then if I hit 7 to go to top view, there's my top view, G, Y, and there we go. So that's all of our reference images in the proper spots, and we don't have to look at them when we don't want to. So now I'm going to hide this reference cube that I was using for a size reference, and then hit Shift A to add a new mesh and add a cube. I'm going to scale it down and drag it up so that's G, and then Z to snap to the Z axis. And then scale it a little bit so that it's about right. It looks like my reference image is a little bit to the side, so GX, snap to the X axis, and then hold Shift just to get that perfectly precise movement in there, and we're good. So now I'm going to scale on the Z axis, scale this down. And that looks about right. 3 just to check the side view, and that looks about center. So now I'm going to hit Tab and enter edit mode. Another way to enter edit mode is in this drop-down menu. So there's object mode and then edit mode. This is really what all you're going to need for modeling. And to get started, I know that, well, let's do this first. So I'm going to hit 3, not on my number pad, but on my top row of keys, to select face select mode. So you can also do this by clicking right here, but 1 is vertex mode, 2 is edge select mode, and 3 is face select mode. Very useful hotkeys. You should learn and remember them. So now I'm going to G to grab and move this to a proper spot where I like it, and grab this back face and do the same thing, G, and there we go. And so since I know that this chair is symmetrical, it's mirrored on both sides, I'm going to make a loop cut with Control R, click to select that, and then right click to place it in the center. And I'm going to delete half of my cube right now, and then apply a mirror modifier so that I only have to do one half of the chair, and it will model both halves of the chair. So I'm going to go into face select mode by hitting 3 on the top row of my number keys, not on my numpad. And then I'm going to hit Z to check out wireframe mode so that I can see through my object, but more importantly, I can select object faces that I cannot directly see because they're behind other faces. Then I'm going to hit X and delete just the faces, and then I can hit Z to go back into solid view, or if I want to use a handy shortcut, I can just hit Shift Z. So Shift Z switches between solid view and wireframe view, and it's pretty useful for doing some handy edits. So now to apply my mirror modifier, or well, to start my mirror modifier, applying is actually a different thing in Blender. I'm going to click on this little wrench right here, and then click Add Modifier, and then scroll down to Mirror right here. And then I'm going to, right now clipping is turned off. This is what happens when clipping is turned off. You can actually drag your model through itself. So kind of a problem for us right now, but there are certain cases in which you're going to want to turn clipping off, keep it off. For us, we want to turn clipping on. So now when I do that same thing, if I go to try to move it back and forth, it's clashing with itself and sticking together. So that's what we want. One thing I've noticed is this chair right here, the back of it does not line up perfectly with this right here. So I'm going to grab this edge, go back to front view, G, Z, or not Z, X, and that looks pretty correct to me. So now I want to start modeling these legs, so I'm going to add another loop cut. So that's R. The cool thing about loop cuts, Control R to do a loop cut, and then before you've clicked, you can actually scroll to add multiple loop cuts. So if you need to add a bunch of uniform divisions to something, you can use loop cuts like that. But I just want one, so left click to place it. Then I'm going to move it over to where I want it, and that looks correct. And now I want to start modeling, and I know I'm going to be using the front view and the side view quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out a new window. So if I go down to any of the corners and then drag from the right to the left, whoops. There we go. If I drag from the right to the left, it'll open a new window. And so I can set this view to front view and this view over here to side view and look at my model from two different angles at once, which is really useful for making sure that you don't like accidentally model something that's really weird from different views. Like it looks good from one view because you were working on it in that view, but it looks bad from the other views because you didn't realize that you were messing it up on accident. If you want to get rid of these windows, all you have to do is hover over this and then right click and then select join areas and then just click on the one that you want to disappear. So again, that's just going to any corner. So I did it in the bottom corner, bottom right. Now I'm going to do it in the top right and drag it out. And you can also drag down to do top and bottom, but I don't want that, so I'm just going to get rid of it with join area. And I also don't want to see this menu on the side right here. It's kind of getting in the way. So I'm just going to hit T on my keyboard, and that gets rid of that. So now I have my front view and my side view, and I can see my model from two angles, which is pretty cool. So Control R to make a loop cut, move it over. And now we have this basis right here for our front leg. And so you can go into face select mode and then just hit E to extrude that face down. So the main tools that we're using right now are G for grab, S for scale, a little bit of R for rotate, and then Control R to make loop cuts, and E to make extrusions. That's really all you need for modeling at least the basic mesh of most things. So I've noticed right now that my leg is not exactly flat, and I want it to be flat. So I could either try rotating it till it's perfect and, mess it up a bunch and not be happy with what I made, or I can hit S with this face selected, Z to snap it to the Z axis, and then 0 to make the scale on the Z axis 0 so that I know that it's perfectly flat. Which is a lot easier than trying to rotate something. Then I'm just going to place this leg in the center. And then since I know that it's on the floor and in the proper Y position, I'm just going to hit G in this window and then X to snap to the X axis and move it over here. And then I'm going to scale it. And then GX to move it over. And it looks a little bit small on this axis, so I'm going to do scale X, GX, and then GY, and then scale Y down a bit and hold shift just to get that perfect, precise little bit. And there we go. That's looking good. Except this is looking a bit off, so I'm just going to hit 2 for edge select, grab it, and then do 3 for my side view, and then G to grab and move. And that looks good. Now I'm going to make it the back leg, and you see, since I have my mirror modifier applied, front legs are looking good. So I'm going to do the back legs now. Again, Control R, place that loop cut right there. And then we have our other loop cut from before, so we don't even have to do another loop cut. Select that face. Again, E to extrude down. Don't have to be super precise with it because we can just hit G and then move it. Same trick, scale Z0 to make the foot flat and in the proper spot. Looks like it's off a bit, so we're going to do GX, move it over a bit. Just kind of winging it, eyeballing it. GY, scale. Okay. And now I'm going to add some more loop cuts in here because I see this isn't lining up quite that well. So Control R for a loop cut. Doesn't really matter where you place it because I'm going to move it. And I'm strategically placing my loop cut right here because I know that I'm going to want to extrude this bit out right here to make this bar. So I'm going to make another loop cut and place it on the other side of that. And then I want to get this bend in here, so another loop cut, and then just place it. Now to work on this bar, I'm going to do the loop cuts on the other side, so here we go. And another loop cut. And then to do this bar, I could do it by extruding these faces and then connecting them at the center, but instead I'm going to select this face and then shift click and select the other face and hit X and then delete these faces. And then I'm going to go into edge select mode with 2. Select this edge, select the opposite edge, hit F to create a face between them. Do that again with the bottom one. So that's select and then shift select, F to make a face. And now, still in edge select mode, if I hold Alt and then click this edge, it selects the loop of edges in between these 4 faces. So if I hit F, that adds that face. Again, Alt, left click, F, add that face. And now I've got that little bar made. So I'm going to do the same thing with the front bar, but since I have my mirror modifier applied, or not applied yet, I can view it, but it's not technically applied. I'm going to hold off on doing that for now. So I'm going to switch my views. So this is going to turn into my side view because I think I'm going to be working in the front view a little bit more. So it's just 3 for face select, 1, extrude up. Just placing the edges. Snapping to the x-axis because I know that all my stuff's in the relatively correct spot. Now go into side view. I'm going to select this top bit and then working over here, GY, because I know it's at the proper height. And select that edge right there, grab it and pull it down. Okay. And now I'm going to make one last edge cut before I apply my mirror modifier, because I know that I'm going to want an edge cut right here. So let's do Control R for that, and then apply that edge cut right here. And one thing about this edge loop is, since this is angled, this edge loop is actually a bit off. So let's collapse this view because I'm not going to use it too much anymore. Join areas, yep. So you see this is off, this is not correct. It's not flat, and I want it to be flat for my final model. So I'm going to select this edge, and then I'm going to, in this view, hit G twice. So that's GG. And now I can move this edge along this face without deforming my mesh at all. So that's really useful for if you want to move your edge loops around, but you don't want to deform your model at all. If I were to just hit G regularly, now I'm deforming the model, and it can accidentally make it like weird and wonky, and I have to be a lot more precise with it. But if I hit G twice, I can go wherever I want with this mouse, and it's still going to be the same as if I were to do it with pinpoint accuracy. Okay, and now that we've added that in, we're going to hit Tab to go back into object mode so that we can apply our mirror modifier, and then hit Tab to go back into edit mode. And now I'm going to select these faces and delete them, and do that same trick as before, where I select one face and then select the opposite face and then hit F to form a face between them, and then select this face and then Shift select the opposite face, and then Alt for that loop select, Alt left click F, Alt left click F. I'm going to do the same thing down here. Select that, select that, select that, select that. X, delete those faces because I don't need them. And select these edges. F for face. Select this edge, F for face. Alt, left click, add a face. Alt, left click, add a face. And now I'm getting kind of far away from my stuff, and my pivot point's a bit weird. So we can do that trick that I showed you earlier. At least I think I showed you earlier, where you select something and then you hit period on the number pad to snap to it so that the pivot point is set to the median point of whatever you have selected. Again, if you don't have a number pad, all you have to do instead is go to View and then Frame Selected, and it will snap that to the center. So now that I have these two edges selected, hit F to make a face. So select that edge, select the opposite edge, F to make a face, Alt select for a loop select, F for a face, and take a guess at what I'm going to do next. That's right, Alt left click and F for a face. And now I have my completed chair model. There's just a few more things that I want to do. What I like to do for making games is I like to cut down the poly count as much as I can, because having too many polygons at once can cause your engine to crash or cause some performance issues. So I'm just going to do the Alt loop cut select on this. So Alt left click and then select that loop cut. And then I'm going to hit X and I'm going to go down to dissolve edges. And now I don't have those edges anymore, which is useful both from a mesh optimization standpoint as well as if I were to texture this with an image texture, then I wouldn't have to worry about having texture across multiple faces if I wanted to do something on this seat. So nice and very efficient modeling. One last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my overlays menu and then scroll all the way to the bottom where it says normals and then click on this display normals thing. And then I'm just going to bring the size down a little bit because I don't need to see the normals that long. What this does is it tells you which direction each of your faces is facing, so what's outside for that face. And this is important for games because game engines will only render one side of a face. They will not render the inside of a face. So if there are any faces where this little blue hair is not sticking out, that means that that face is backwards, and you're going to want to go to Mesh, Normals, and then flip on that face. Or if you want to just do a blanket, recalculate all my normals, Shift N for outside, Shift and Control N for inside. Otherwise, you'd have to write a specific shader to render the face on both sides, and that's a whole lot of work for something that you could have just fixed in your model. So we're going to turn that overlay off. Again, that's the very bottom, normals. And I didn't have any issues with my normals. Now I'm going to go to my object, set origin, and set origin to 3D cursor. My 3D cursor is set to world origin. If you accidentally clicked on this cursor button and then move your cursor around, all you have to do to get your cursor back is hit Shift S and then cursor to world origin, and then click on your mouse tool again. But again, that's just object, set origin, origin to geometry, or origin to 3D cursor, excuse me. One other thing that's good practice is you go to object, apply, and then all transformations. So like this applies your rotation, your scale, and your movement position information. And that's just important for if you are going to add an image texture so it doesn't come out all distorted when you generate your UV maps. The last thing I'm going to do with this chair is add a material to it in Blender. So I'm just going to add this default material. I'm going to change it to bright green because I love this color. It's my favorite color. But you see I can't see anything right now because I'm in solid view and not material preview. So now I can see my chair. And I want it to be more metallic. So I have a green metal chair, and the material is going to be named Shrek Metal, which is a really sick music genre that I invented for this tutorial. And now, if I want to export this for use in a game engine, all I have to do is go to File, Export, FBX. This is a very generally accepted file format for 3D models. It works really well with engines like Unity or Unreal. And then just choose where you want to export it to. And if we want to export just this chair, we click on selected objects, and I don't want to export any of these reference images or this light or this reference cube. So selected objects is what I'm going to go with. path mode if you want to include this wonderful material that we've just created in your FBX so that when you import your model, it automatically is the right color, or if you've added textures to your model, it's got all the textures already applied. All you have to do is set this to copy and then click embed textures to the right of it. And we're going to scroll down. I don't have any animations, so I'm going to uncheck bake animations because I don't want to trick my 3D engine into thinking that this is animated. And lastly, we want to set the proper up and forward information. So if I was importing this into Unity, I know that in Unity, Y is up and Z is forward. So Y up, negative Z forward works pretty well. Typically with Unity, even if you set it to negative Z forward or Z forward, it doesn't make a difference. It'll always import your model backwards, like flipped 180 degrees. So it's just something to look out for. Unity's weird. If you're importing into Unreal, however, it is a Z up and negative X forward. And typically in Unreal, it has imported in the proper rotation for me. But this is just important because if you're importing something into your project, you don't want it to be sideways when you drag it into the scene, because then you have to go in and rotate it. And that's a pain, especially if you're importing multiple instances of that object, because every time you have to go and re-rotate it and everything, and it's kind of a headache. For static meshes, it's not that big a deal, but it's like, hey, why would I not fix the problem before I have it? For animated characters and stuff, it's a much bigger deal because when you import an animation and then you rotate it, you risk the chance of totally breaking your animation. So make sure that you have the proper up and forward coordinates. So that, again, for Unity, that's Y up and negative Z forward. And for Unreal, that's Z up and negative X forward. And then you just export the FBX and then drag it into your engine and import it and whatever. But I'm not going to do that because I don't plan on using this in a game unless you find this in a game that I've made. And then you can say, haha, I know where you got that model from. It's called Shrek Metal. So anyway, that's how you model something for a game. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. But I'm very tired all the time. This tutorial has gone on for too long. Have fun making games. Send me your games. Goodbye.